Hey, everybody, I'm Rich Bowers, and today I'm really excited. I actually get to spend some time with one of my favorite colleagues I've ever worked with, and a guy who seems to know everything. It's quite impressive. Charles Dunn is with me, manager of our data program. Hey, good afternoon for us, Charlie. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Glad to be here. How are you doing?
You know what? I can't complain, but I have been looking forward to this conversation for what, two,
Mm.
3 weeks now, right? So when we were kind of brainstorming and talking about our technology podcast, what we're on right now, Charles, there was so many different areas I thought that we can go into. And when I chat with you though, I think the first thing I think of is space. Is that fair?
Yeah. I do have a brand. I do
We
have a brand.
certainly do. And we did go to NASA together as well, not to
Yes.
not to study, but just to visit. Right. So
Yes.
so we're going to talk about reusable rockets.
Mm. Yeah, that is a very exciting topic and very it's a field that seems to keep making incredible strides very quickly.
Well,
So,
I'm excited about hearing more and more about it. So, do you think reusable rockets, obviously, we hear a lot about it. It's in the news, a lot of big players, a lot of famous people, billionaires, whatever it may be.
mhm.
But you think it may be important to kind of start from the beginning and maybe just the history of rockets and where it's come. You talked about strides, so maybe that's a good place to start.
Yes. Yes. So the history of rockets, the history of what we understand as a rocket today, really starts a very long time ago. It starts around potentially around the year nine, between the years 900 and 1200 CE in ancient China.
Okay.
And there was this, and the Chinese people, they were um, familiar with gunpowder. Gunpowder is where that's where gunpowder was invented, and these they were they discovered that their fire arrows with certain compositions of gunpowder they could propel themselves. So the very earliest rockets were a derivation of a a weapon of war
A weapon.
where they would
Yeah.
a weapon, yeah. And they discovered that, and they and you know these the people, these martial experts were could discover that you didn't have to launch a uh a canister of gunpowder off of an arrow. With the right composition it could launch itself.
Hmm.
So around this time, around between depending on that, there's some dispute over like the actual accurate historical record, but as early as 900 CE, as late as 1200 CE was when this initial discovery was made, and the knowledge of this passed from China through India, and from there into Europe. So the history
Through
of
trade, right?
using
You would say through
through
Silk Road.
trade, yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah.
through silk trade, through so as and the use of these things as a weapon of war. There's many innovations up to around 1600 when it kind of falls off in terms of tech, and as rockets as the a rocket as a weapon of war kind of falls off in 16 in around 1600.
Okay.
And but one thing that remains popular is fireworks. And
Hmm.
there's and the use it uh and a self-propelled device that is able to get really high in the air and explode in a beautiful show. That technology remains popular.
Well, who doesn't love
And
fireworks, right?
who doesn't
So
love fireworks? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
makes sense.
And one thing that I was looking into is there's I believe it was German fireworks makers who hit on this idea of, if you have a canister
Okay.
of your propellant, and once part of the canister is empty, it can drop off, and then have that makes the rest of your rocket lighter, and
Mm.
that makes the uh firework able to go even higher. And so they were kind of intuiting something that would be formalized many years later. So a lot of the a lot of these so the our original understanding of rocketry kind of goes from weapon of war
Yeah.
to tool for display. And then what we understand as modern rocketry starts in the early 20th century, from
Mm.
1900s around to the 1920s, which is when the first what we understand today as modern rockets get started.
Look at
Now,
that. Wow.
yeah.
Okay. So let me kind
Yeah.
of pause real quick. So arrows, rockets used as war, which I
Mhm.
think we're gonna hear about that again when you go to another decade
That
or
might
two,
come up later.
right? And then and then you hear about kind of the fuel or so falling off stages, which are going to, like,
Staging,
correct, which
yes.
is going to be
That's
important as we talk
yes.
later on here, right? So we'll keep
Oh
that
yeah.
in mind. So tell me, quick thing, real fast. Any reason for the decrease in arrows or rockets as arrows in 1600s, or was it just a matter of more so bullets at that time or so?
Yeah, it's like the nature of war, of how war was fought, was changing.
Mm,
Now, I do want to take a step back. I do want to take a brief step back
sure,
and make a very important disclaimer.
please.
I am not an expert on any of this. I do not have a history degree. I do not have a degree in aerospace engineering. I am an enthusiast at most in all of this. So if I get any of these historical details wrong, or if I get any of these technical details wrong, please correct me in the comments. It boosts engagement.
That's great. That's all. That's outstanding. I'll tell you, I listened to a lot of this stuff, we're going through this, and Charlie, you're always so informative, and the passion always shows. So then let's jump to that, that early 1900s, right? And then again, this is giving us
Yes.
the feel for it. And I know some folks maybe, okay, let's get to the space travel and all that stuff,
Mhm.
but I think it's important to see where this kind of goes to, because you can see the change and the rapid development, because now we're
Yes.
120 years ago, and then we can hear about this rapid change. So 1900, 1920s, what happens there?
Yes. So what happens there is the first so the for a long time the rocket enthusiast community had been theorizing about a way of improving rockets with so up until this point, gunpowder is a solid fuel. Gunpowder is a solid, it's, you can imagine gunpowder,
Yeah,
it's a powder.
powder,
So
right? It's in the word,
yeah,
it's in the name.
it's right there in the name.
Yep.
But one thing that had long been a desire of the rocket community is a liquid fueled rocket.
Mm.
Liquid fuels are lighter, they can be more explosive, but they're much harder to work with. And
Mm.
so it's around this time, around the 1920s, that the first liquid fueled rocket gets is successfully launched, and that is by an American engineer named Robert Goddard is the first person to launch a liquid fueled rocket. And
And that got
this,
pretty fast, right? By the way, 60
mhm,
miles an hour, something like that. It was able to,
yeah,
right? I
yeah,
believe.
yeah. It's a very famous photo of him standing next to his little rocket rig that he built. um, yeah. So this is so, and this time it's actually interesting that simultaneously at almost at different points in the world, different people come to kind of the same conclusion. You have
And
Robert
unbeknownst
Goddard,
to each other, right? By the way,
unbeknownst to each other. Yeah.
we're not sharing
Yeah.
data. Mhm.
Yeah. Unbeknownst. So you have Robert Goddard. You have a scientist, you have a team in England, and another person who is going to be kind of important. This is going to be I apologize to everyone of Russian descent. I cannot pronounce. I will not attempt to pronounce this man's first name, but Dr. Sirkovsky from
Okay.
Russia, who developed, and he was the first chronologically to formalize this, what's known as the ideal rocket equation, and that's sometimes called Sirkovsky's rocket equation, which is going to, and the math of this, unfortunately, we are going to have to talk a little bit about math in this podcast.
Oh no.
But but the Sirkovsky's rocket equation is, and again, I'm going to, this is a podcast, there's no visual component to this, so I'm going to kind of
missing out on
talk
it.
talk through the equation, which is delta V, your change in velocity, is going to be equal to your rocket's exhaust velocity times the natural log of the mass of the starting mass of your rocket and the mass of your rocket without the fuel. So the natural log. So it's the exhaust velocity times natural log of what's known as the wet mass of a rocket divided by the dry mass of the rocket. So and delta V, the change in velocity, you need your rocket to be, that delta V needs to be greater than acceleration due to gravity on Earth. On Earth, that's 9.8 meters per second squared. So you need a delta V of greater than 9.8 meters per second, hopefully significantly greater than 9.8 meters per second. So
this is a huge equation for what you're about to go through. Yeah.
Right.
And
so
by the way, for everybody else who's listening who didn't follow it, Charlie's kind of giving me hand signals and everything as I'm looking at him. I'm going to pretend to follow it as well, but the math is there. It adds up.
Yeah. So again, this is the ideal rocket equation. Obviously, saying it's rocket science is literally cultural shorthand for saying something is complicated. But the broad strokes of it is that you have three variables to play with: your exhaust velocity, the mass of your rocket, and the mass of the propellant.
Okay.
So
massive in terms of we're going to talk about like cost of getting rockets back, right? We're going to talk
right. Yes.
So that all, I mean, makes sense. You can see what the challenges are.
Right. So rocketry is on some level playing with those three variables. Can you find a fuel with a faster exhaust velocity? Can you make a lighter rocket? Can you use lighter fuel? So the idea of the innovation of liquid fuels, that's a change in the mass of your fuel, and you get higher exhaust velocities. If you want to take like the ideal scenario of adjusting the exhaust velocity, you could find the most powerful fuel you could find, the most powerfully explosive things you can possibly find, which will get you some really great exhaust velocity, but they're also incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
Like there's a certain point where it's simply not practical to work with something that explosive.
Especially when you're talking about billions and billions of dollars here, right?
Billions and billions of dollars.
Not to mention life. Yeah.
Yeah. And that segues nicely into using lighter fuels.
Mhm.
And the lightest fuel that you can possibly use is gonna be uranium. And
Oh, okay.
there were some very serious people who suggested that the ideal launch system would be to have a pusher plate underneath an atomic bomb and
Sure.
set off the
First
atomic
thing
bomb.
anybody would think
Yeah,
of, right? Yeah.
yeah, launches it right into space.
Yeah.
And everyone said, and no, we're not going to do that. And all the rocket scientists said, why? Look at these numbers. These numbers are great. It's such an efficient launch system. And then everyone said, no, we're not setting off an atomic bomb to put every time we want to send something into space. So that's a non-starter. So the point where these savings kind of
Mhm.
comes into play is going to be lower the dry mass of the rocket, make the rocket lighter as it goes. And this is where you see the iconic footage of rockets, the iconic footage of, for example, the Saturn V
Mhm.
rocket, the biggest rocket ever built at time of recording. Um,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, so it is going to be when it gets up out of the atmosphere, you see that first the bottom of the rocket drop off because what you're doing is this is the concept of staging where the rocket once the rocket gets lighter, so once the rocket has escaped, has used all the fuel that's
Mhm.
in that part of the rocket,
They don't need that
it
section
drops off.
anymore, right?
They don't
Drop it
need that
off.
part of it anymore. Yeah, just
Uh,
get it off. So just make the rocket lighter. And so that is actually a very efficient way of launching a rocket. And it's the predominant, and it is the most dominant model in the modern rocket industry. You have a rocket that has several boosters. The rocket gets up to a certain point,
yep.
uses all of the now I want to be very careful with my words here, uses all of the propellant in the boosters, and then when the boosters are empty, they drop off. Rest of the rocket continues. When that's empty, that part drops off, and then what's known as the payload is in orbit.
Got it.
And
Well,
so, yeah.
and that's a lot. And you walk through a
Yes.
ton there. We're going to actually hit on a bunch of it because you also mentioned you said propellant instead of fuel, which is going to be
Yes.
important when you talk about SpaceX's Raptor or so, or whatever it may be
Yes.
later on here. So let me just keep it going. We can kind of graze over this pretty quickly. Continuing your rocket history basis,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then we go to World War
Yes.
II,
Then we
Germany
go to
with the
yes.
V2, correct?
Yes. Yes. The V2 rocket was the first what was the first was I believe it was like the first practical use of a liquid fueled rocket. And it was once again a weapon of war that was
Okay.
used in the Blitz against London
Okay.
and England, sorry.
Yep.
But
So, and then that was
but
obviously 1942, right? And
yes.
then once the Allies beat the Axis powers, then there was
Hmm.
a rush to get these German rocket scientists, right? Between Russia
Yes.
and the
Yeah,
US,
but
which
mhm.
plays a big part in kind of the
Yep.
space race, right?
Yep. Yep.
And then the US was able to get von Braun, right?
Yes. Yes. So the history of rocketry involves, well, there's no other way to put it. It involves a lot of weird guys. Like there's a lot of very people with very like long personalities, let's put it that way. Like Sirkovsky himself um wrote many books on like ethics and philosophy in addition to his book, in addition to his rocket equation. So
I mean,
Goddard.
they're thinking a
Yeah,
different. They just think they're thinking a different way, right?
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, not
yeah,
only are
yeah,
they mathematically and physically inclined, then they're also
yeah.
futurist
They're
too,
also few. Yes,
right?
yes,
So
yeah,
and you know, obviously the scramble for the rocket scientists at the end of World War
yes.
II, Operation Paperclip,
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal. That's a different podcast, or
Yeah,
so. But then kind of take us to, and I want to just obviously be conscious of your time as well.
right.
You know, when we go to the space race, Russia
Yes.
versus the US, right? Kind of tell us
Mm-hmm.
about rockets there and maybe some of
Yeah,
those changes and where we are with
yeah.
that.
It was kind of a proxy. It was a proxy battle. It was like a battle between like which of the two superpowers during the Cold War could demonstrate their command of technology more.
Yeah.
And the United States rather famously poured a tenth of its GDP into beating the Soviet Union to the moon,
Hmm.
which they did,
Yep.
and using the aforementioned Saturn V rocket. And if you look at the Saturn V, as I said, it is the biggest rocket that has ever been built at time of recording, and it's a skyscraper. It's a skyscraper sized. It is a very tall building with an explosion underneath it. And if you look at it, and the how much of that rocket came back? How we launched a skyscraper. And if
Hmm.
you look at the capsule that actually held the people, it's small. It's not even a very large room.
No,
The early astronauts described these capsules as something you didn't fly in, it's something you wear.
that's
And
and that's what they
yeah,
have on. Just in case you guys go to NASA, they first of all, Saturn V is there, right?
yes, there is
Right.
a Saturn V rocket at Houston in the Houston mission control.
Mission control. Yep. And
Yeah,
then you have, and then
yeah.
the capsules are, you know, it literally looks like they're just there. It's a chair in
Yes.
a tin can, basically, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that is how much is coming back to Earth. That's the capsule that holds the person that that returns.
Yep.
So, and it's also, and in the case of the Apollo missions, that's what they brought back the moon samples in. So
Hmm.
the payload was the capsule, the lunar lander, and even the lunar lander didn't come back to Earth. It was just the tiny capsule.
It's not there. Mhm.
And
And by the way,
the
just for clarification, because payload's going to be a big factor here too.
yes,
Payload
yes,
is basically the extra weight of materials carried up or
mm,
carried down. Is that correct? Is
yeah,
that how you would define it?
yeah. So let's take a step back,
Mhm.
define some terms.
Yep.
So we have the payload. The payload is what you are actually trying to launch. It's the part of the rocket that you are trying to get into space. It's the thing that you care about being in space. It is
So
not necessary. Yeah,
material, right?
yes.
Materials,
Hmm.
lander or
Materials.
rovers, lander, whatever it may be. People, is it the
Yeah.
people count as
People.
payload? Right.
People are payload in this
Mhm.
context
Yep.
because they're not necessary for the rocket to function.
Mhm.
And so we also the other terms that are going to be important are propellant, fuel, and reaction mass. So propellant is going to be a combination of fuel and oxidizers, and reaction mass is what you're actually throwing out the back of the rocket to make the rest of the rocket go up.
Okay.
Newton's third law of motion: for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. A rocket is you throw stuff out the back of the rocket, that stuff is your reaction mass. So that if the action is throwing it out the back of the rocket, the reaction is the rocket going up. So now there's a reason why rocket nerds will yell at you if you call it fuel, because
Okay.
fuel is half of it. Fuel is the rocket fuel is the stuff that is exploding, more or less.
Okay.
The oxidizer is the stuff that makes it explode. Because if you think back to high school chemistry, what do you need for combustion? You need carbon, you need oxygen. They react, produces carbon dioxide and water. Now, obviously, this is not a combustion reaction, but it's not okay. So it's not a oh man, I'm just all of the chemistry people listening to this are just are just like trying to inflict psychic damage on me now as I'm trying to explain this. but 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 the idea is that you need to react the fuel with oxygen, with an oxidizer, in order to produce the chemical reaction that makes the rocket go. And the problem with a chemical rocket is that you have to carry that oxidizer with you. Because if you're going into space, there's no oxygen.
Not there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not there. It's not there. So in addition, this is again what rocket nerds, all kinds of nerds, love being dramatic. And the ways in which rocket nerds like being dramatic is describing this as the tyranny of the rocket equation. You have to the problem with all rocketry is that you have to carry your fuel with you. You can't stop to refuel in between Earth and space. That's just not physically possible yet. And yeah. So what this ultimately boils down to is that every time you build a rocket, you have to build the whole rocket, even though you only care about the small room at the top of it.
So with that, do you think this is a good transition to kind of go to the reusable rocket?
Yes.
Right?
So the next thing that you have to think about is cost. And so you're building a skyscraper because you only care about the small room at the top. And here's the sad thing about the Saturn V. Every single one of those skyscrapers was one-time use. Every single one. Yeah, they had to build a new one each time. And so that entire first stage booster drops into the ocean. Second stage booster drops into the ocean. Third stage booster drops into the ocean. And it's just unusable again. And
a lot of waste. So much waste.
It's a lot of waste. And that was okay when you were launching 8 missions to the moon in total.
Yeah.
And
over the course of what, 4 or 6 years, something like that, right? How many years?
Yeah. So we did it. We won. We annoyed the Russians. Mission accomplished.
So then, but now our game plan isn't to just do 8 in 4 or 6 years, whatever it may be. Obviously, you've heard some 3 a day if you it's Mr. Musk, but reusable rockets. When we think about it, right? So you have all this waste that you just mentioned. Wouldn't it be brilliant if you could reuse something?
Yep. Right? Because that has been the dream. That has been the goal for basically the entire history of using staged rockets. What if we could find this stage and use it again? And
just staging just in case is when things are dropped off, and as Charlie mentioned, fall into the ocean, right? How can we go use that piece again?
How can we go use that again?
Yeah.
And so there have been several attempts at doing this. The absolute dream of the entire space industry is the space plane. The space plane, everyone wants to build one of these. It takes off like a plane. We're
Mhm.
good at building planes.
Got that
It
down pat.
flies into space like a rocket. Then it lands like a plane. We're very good at landing planes. And
Knock on wood. Yep.
knock on wood, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
But remember, it's safer to fly in a plane than it is to fly in a car.
I think
So
about it every time.
I stole that joke. I stole that joke from the Onion. Thanks, the Onion. Um, um
So,
so
and we just, and by the way, we try to put a rocket on top of a plane, or did that,
yes, yes,
right?
yes.
Mhm.
That's how Virgin Galactic's space vehicle launches.
Oh, that's okay.
Um,
That's how it is.
yeah, yeah. So the plane takes off, you drop the plane, it drops the rocket, and then it takes off.
Okay.
And then it takes off like a rocket. And
Hmm.
that idea has also been tried many, many times. Like there was one of the plans, one of the early ideas was to use a balloon. Like balloons are really easy to make. You just send it up like a balloon, the rocket drops off, it flies the rest of the way to space.
Okay.
But the problem with that is that getting a rocket from ground to cruising altitude of a plane isn't the most expensive part of the journey. The most expensive part of the journey comes after that. So plane assisted launches will save you some money, but not all of the money.
Okay. So not enough to
So,
write home about,
right,
right?
yeah.
Mhm.
So really what you want is your stages to be reusable. You want your you want once the stage drops off, you want to find that stage and reuse it. Now,
Real quick. Sorry to interrupt.
yes,
To take a pause here, right? The reason why we don't do this more often, it really is a big cost factor,
yes,
right? So
and yeah,
to get a pound into space, do you know how much that costs?
let
I know.
me check.
So when I was looking it up, I've seen a range of anywhere between $10,000 to $20,000
Yep.
per pound. And on top of that, one of the areas I was kind of going back and forth with is what's weighing more, the rockets or the fuel? And everything said that the rockets weigh so much more. Is that
Yes.
right? So,
Yes.
you know, when you're looking at the cost, the major cost is the rocket,
Yep.
correct?
Yep. Yep. The rock, like the because you have to carry your propellant
Yeah.
and you have to carry the thing that holds the propellant.
Mm-hmm.
So the weight of the most of the weight of the rocket is in the complicated systems that are necessary to control the explosion. So,
So then what you're saying is if we're able to reuse that instead of having to make it from scratch every time, then it
mhm,
might be feasible to get up into space more often.
it might be yes, because
Right.
if you only have to build that first stage once and then refurbish it,
Yep.
that's honestly that's most of your cost saved.
And
So
refurbishing
mm,
does cost a decent amount, as we saw with
yes,
what the space the is it space shuttle, right?
yes, yeah, we'll probably revisit this
Yeah.
when we talk about NASA, but the space shuttle was honestly a disappointment in terms of reusable space vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Because the short version is that NASA ended up having to almost rebuild the space shuttle each time,
Each
rebuild the
time
space shuttle
from scratch
each
each
time this
time.
from
And,
scratch each time.
and meanwhile, here that the whole reason was cost savings, right? Or
Yep,
vacancy, right?
yep.
So again, being conscious of your time as we kind of hit a little bit the
Mm-hmm.
later stages of our chat here.
Mm.
Let's talk about, you know, if you don't mind, where are we right now? Obviously, we have a couple big key players, right?
We have a couple. We
SpaceX.
have
Mhm.
SpaceX is definitely the biggest name
Yep.
in reusable rockets. Blue Origin, the Jeff Bezos's company, wants to uh, also get in on get become a major player in the in the field.
Mhm.
There's also, but there are also some other launch companies that don't have the kind of that big name publicity, but are still very effective. Rocket Lab, for example, they have a reusable launch system. Um, and now, what's interesting about this is so when you're thinking about reusing a rocket, you really just want to pick up the rocket. You really just want to pick up that first stage booster again.
Mhm.
And the and at a certain mass, maybe you could just pick it up again. And Rocket Labs reusable booster system is that their rocket has a parachute on it. And
So it
after
gently
that stage,
falls into the
yeah,
water.
after that stage, after the first stage drops off, the parachute just kind of brings that to the ground and well into the water, as you said.
Mhm.
And now that is a beautiful, efficient, cost-saving system up to a certain weight. So
Okay.
if a booster, if you so remember, the heavier the payload, the bigger the rocket needs to be. The bigger the rocket needs to be, the more fuel, the more propellant it has to carry. The more propellant it has to carry, the bigger the first stage has to be. The bigger the first stage has to be, the more expensive it is, and so on.
And the
So,
more unlikely it will be to do right at
yeah,
this stage.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
yep.
So, this is where the iconic image of the rocket landing itself comes from. The first the first the first so people have wanted to do this for a very once again wanted to do this for a very long time. Um and the and NASA back in the 90s had a vertical takeoff, vertical landing rocket system. And it worked, but there was a catastrophic accident and NASA didn't either get funding to try to build another one, or they were simply not interested in that kind of reusable rocket at the time. So this is where this is where SpaceX, the first major player in the industry the to do the dream rocket vertical takeoff, vertical landing. And part of the problem is that landing a rocket is very hard. Okay, that sounds like it's sarcasm, but
It's even
really
hard in rocket science terms, what you're saying, right?
it's even hard in terms of rocket science because of you need to make very precise calculations. You need to make very precise maneuvers on a rocket going off. You have to have very precise thrust vectoring. You have to have very precise control over the rocket, and it has to land the entire system gently. And that's what the SpaceX's Falcon boosters are able to do. They're able to launch their payload and have enough fuel for a precision controlled burn soft landing. And that soft landing means that all that they have to do is once it lands softly, fuel it up again, it's good to go for the next launch. So that is the innovation of the reusable rocket. You can launch the first stage into space, launch
Mhm.
the first stage so that the payload gets into space. The first stage lands again to be refueled and used on the next launch. And that is a monumental cost savings.
And when you're talking about this is Falcon 9, right? Is that
Yes.
so we're this in 2015, 2016,
Hmm.
right? How much progress has been between that and 2023 now? I mean, obviously, I think there's Falcon Heavy coming out. I don't know if that what
Yes.
that status
Yeah.
is, but where are we at right now?
So the the Falcon 9 is the it's the iconic image. It is a medium lift launch vehicle. Um SpaceX describes it as partially reusable. You can reuse the first stage booster. The Falcon Heavy is it has two reusable rocket boosters. And um so double the power, then both boosters drop off and are able to land and be reused again. So
And there's
uh
dual, right? You want the dual rockets
yes.
put more mass up into space, right? Able
Yes. Yeah.
okay.
So the Falcon Heavy has been very successful. Um and it has successfully put people put let me just think here. Yeah, so it has been it as of last year, they're using the Falcon Heavy to launch satellites. So it is a successful system. Um and it's going to be keep being used for commercial space flights.
Hmm.
Uh NASA is currently accelerating its Orion mission. If there are any ultra rocket nerds listening to this podcast, not that Project Orion, unfortunately, but this is their. I have a sneaking suspicion that they called it Orion to get people to stop thinking about the other one, the atomic bomb one.
Yeah.
But but yeah, so this Orion mission is um going back to the moon.
Mhm.
And NASA will use what they're calling the SLS, the Solid Launch System. And it's just an incredible acronym right there. But that the SLS is a traditional launch system. It is a traditional non-reusable staging system. So, and that will be the largest rocket ever built when that mission is when that mission takes off. So, a space launch system. Oh my gosh, I said solid. I'm so sorry, everyone.
You know
I'm
what?
so
I wasn't going to correct you.
yeah,
Well, when you're going through this, you know what I was
yeah,
really getting a kick out of the names of this whole area. You have
yes.
Falcon Heavy, you have Space Launch System, and then you have Dragon, Merlin, Raptor. Right? They either
Mm,
went very plain and generic, like to the extreme, or they went this mythical, like super cool ones that I think we all
mm.
would really enjoy. Merlin. I mean, how cool is that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. You can tell um, one of the you can tell which one is, the government operation and which one has and which one has to be marketed.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely can. It got my attention. So
Mhm.
as we're kind of bringing those up, um, let's go for it. Right, we get you got a little bit more time.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I have time.
let's talk about space exploration then, right? Because
Yes.
these reusable rockets, that's really our game plan, right? Is that really what
Mhm.
the main point of getting this advancement is to go out there?
Weirdly,
Not sure.
I would argue no. I
What
would
do you think?
argue that Yeah, I would argue that now, because space exploration requires a completely different paradigm. It requires a completely different way of traveling, because when you're in space, when you're in deep space,
Mhm.
you're not necessarily you're not as concerned with maximum velocity. you're not necessarily concerned with getting, because from Earth's surface to space is, you have to be going consistently with a delta V of greater than 9.8 meters per second squared. You have to get that consistent acceleration to break Earth's acceleration due to gravity. But once you're in deep space, you're alone. There's nothing.
There's
So
just a certain line that you have to now. Deep
yeah,
space. How are you defining deep space? Kármán line, or are you talking about just outside? Just once we get past what X amount of, was it 62 miles?
yeah. Just, well, once you get outside of the influence of Earth's gravity,
Okay.
once you get outside of that, when you're talking about space exploration, so let's talk some of the biggest examples
Mhm.
in recent events: the Mars rovers and the JWST, the space telescope.
Mhm.
Both of those, so when you like getting to like getting out into the solar system, at this point, what NASA uses to propel what deep space missions are propelled by are what's called gravity boosts,
Okay.
where you get into a foreign body, or a astronomical body, fall into it, turn, and then just turn slightly so that your acceleration due to gravity accelerates you into space and accelerates you past it. And this has been the way that pretty much all missions have gone anywhere past Mars, because usually they go around the sun, get a gravity boost from the sun, get
Mhm.
a gravity boost from the inner
Little
planets, get a
whip,
gravity
right?
boost from Mars. Yeah. And
Mhm.
then get a gravity boost. That's how Voyager got out there. That's how the Voyagers got out there. That's how Cassini, Galileo, the Pluto mission, all of that. So once you're out in space, you're going to use something very light and very efficient, like an ion drive,
Okay.
that has a very low maximum velocity, but a very high specific impulse, a very high. Well, let me just put it this way: it will give you a gentle push for a very long time. That's
So
the
slowly but
deep.
surely, right? A little bit,
Yes.
and still
That's
faster
the
than what we're expecting.
yeah. But the the promise of reusable rockets
Mhm.
is reliable uh delivery to low Earth orbit and geosynchronous orbit. So low Earth orbit is where most of your satellites are.
Mhm.
It's where the International Space Station lives, and it's where, a lot of where your, communication satellites are. So if you can get that distance between Earth's surface and low Earth orbit cheaply, there is a huge market for that. You've got communication satellites, you've got uh just messaging satellites, GPS positioning
Mhm.
satellites, and the services to repair and maintain those things. Because if a satellite becomes defunct, if a satellite becomes unrepairable, usually they
Okay,
either
right.
just
So,
leave it there,
mhm.
which has maybe some problems we'll get into in a moment here, or have it burn up in the atmosphere, deorbit and it burns up, and it burns up in the atmosphere. And most of these satellites probably won't hit anyone on the way down. They're very small,
So,
but
so, so then when we're talking about, all this pretty cool stuff, right?
yeah,
Overall, it's almost for commercial use.
it's
I
for
mean,
commercial use. Yeah, it's mostly for commercial use, honestly, or government use,
okay.
um, for any kind of insinuations you want to take from that statement.
Thank you. I would expect nothing less, Mr. Dunn. So when, because when we think about it and just kind of, I feel like the advertising is reusable rockets, let's go to Mars,
Mm, I
right?
mean, that is definitely a part of it. That is
Mhm.
definitely a part of it. But when they're advertising cheap access to space, they're advertising to um, people who like institutions that want a presence in space,
Space.
institutions that want their own satellites to improve the reliability of their service.
Mhm.
And now I said something very spooky about the government, but it's also important for environmental monitoring, weather predictions. Like all of these kinds of services are very important. And like you want the most accurate maps of, for example, developing hurricanes or
Okay.
other dangerous weather systems, and having a cheap, reliable presence in space will absolutely improve that will
It's valuable
absolutely
right
improve
there.
that
Very, very
capability.
valuable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay. So then as we, and that was a great walkthrough,
Hmm.
of everything. You kind of gave us a ton. I want to ask you this, and kind of towards our wrap up here, then, right? So we'll
Yeah.
keep an eye out on where this is going to go. And I was looking
Hmm.
up. I mentioned to you before the Raptor, which seems pretty crazy,
Yes.
using I think methane as a fuel and some
Hmm.
advantages with that, right? Um,
Yeah.
but also what we like to do during these sessions is also talk about roles, right? And what type of
Yes.
people from a technology standpoint, outside of
Hmm.
scientists, are they looking for? And I think you and I were kind of digging around for at Blue Origin and SpaceX. And did you see some
Hmm.
roles that you thought were fairly obtainable in the IT space?
Yeah. Yeah. So now there are like there's kind of there's two sides of this. If you're coming from a tech background, and by tech I mean like computer technology,
Mhm.
computer science, computer engineering, there's the like embedded systems kind of people, like really like low level kind of computer programmer kind of roles.
Okay. Yeah.
But and that is going to be and that you're going to need, that is, you know C++,
Yeah.
those kinds of
I did see a little Python in there as well,
yes.
right?
And that's kind of, and that's, the other side of it, because these companies, as I mentioned, they like the computer precision required to land these rockets means that these are also tech companies. And and they have general applicability of just technology, everything from, they need they need data analysis, they need people to not necessarily build the rockets but understand the telemetry that the rockets are sending back. They need to like, if these launches are going to keep happening, we're going to get reams of data from them, and that needs to be processed. And not even and even on a lower level than that, these are also companies that need just servers. They need their own internal system, so their own internal data storage. So, like, if you're coming from our jump program, there is always going to be a need for Docker REST APIs. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is something that these companies need, not necessarily for the rockets themselves, but as an organization with tech infrastructure,
Mhm.
maintaining the tools that the rocket scientists need to improve the rockets. So yes, there is the space on for the people actually building the rockets, but that's not the only thing that these companies need for potential hires. And
Plus, I don't know if you
hmm?
saw the title. You get a really cool title called Starship Engineer as
Yes,
well. So very, very
yeah,
fancy.
yeah.
Uh,
I need that title, honestly.
you know what? You can have it. That could be your new title here. If you like. So with that, my friend, again, you totally lived up to the hype. I felt like this was my Christmas day, getting to spend an hour or so with you here.
Thanks, Rich.
Any parting words of wisdom to leave with us regarding reusable rockets?
It is a rapidly developing field. It's evolving. It is improving so much faster than people are than people expected. There is plenty of opportunity. There is a lot of opportunity in this field, and even at smaller scales. One thing I didn't get to. There's also an entire industry of CubeSats, which are small satellites about the size. They're a couple of kilograms. You can hold one in your hand, and they're usually built of off the shelf parts that just anyone could potentially build one of these. So, and there is an entire industry, and these are very useful. These are things that are rapidly becoming useful. So even though like the big players dominate the heavy launch systems, space exploration at the small scale is becoming an increasingly attainable for startups. So there is room at every level of this field to fill low Earth orbit with garbage. We're polluting space, everybody.
That's the perfect. Hey, at least we're bringing it back now instead of in the water, right? So in some areas. So with that, I can't think of a better way to end it. Again, always such a pleasure. I'm sure we'll do something. There's so many more topics we could touch on, but for Charles Dunn, I'm Rich Bowers, and this was Our Technology. Take care, my friend.
Hope you enjoyed, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.